May 14th, 1998. Los Angeles, California. 9:20 p.m. Frank Sinatra died in the arms of his wife Barbara, surrounded by his children. But 3 hours earlier, in a moment of startling clarity, he had asked for a small leather notebook that he'd kept locked in his desk for over 30 years. With trembling hands, he opened it to a page marked with a red ribbon and pointed to 3 names written in his own handwriting. "These 3," he whispered to his daughter Tina. "These are the ones who broke me. Not my voice failing, not age. These 3 people took pieces of me I never got back." The notebook, revealed in Tina Sinatra's 2015 memoir, My Father's Daughter, contained Frank's private accounting of betrayals that shaped the second half of his life. Betrayals by people he had loved, trusted, and elevated to positions of power, only to have them destroy him from the inside. The world remembers Frank Sinatra as the chairman of the board, Old Blue Eyes, the voice. A man who seemed invincible, whose career spanned 5 decades, who commanded stages and studios with absolute authority. But that image, carefully maintained until his final breath, hid a devastating truth. Frank Sinatra spent the last 30 years of his life haunted by 3 specific betrayals that cost him his marriage, his friendships, and very nearly his sanity. And he never forgave any of them. This is not the story of Frank Sinatra's triumphs. This is the story of the wounds that never healed, the notebook he kept hidden, and the 3 names he made sure his children would remember as the ones who taught him that even the chairman of the board could be destroyed by those closest to him. To understand the weight of Frank Sinatra's notebook, you must first understand the empire he built and the vulnerability that lay beneath it. Born Francis Albert Sinatra on December 12, 1915, in Hoboken, New Jersey, to Italian immigrant parents, Frank clawed his way out of poverty through sheer force of talent and will. By the 1940s, he was the biggest singing star in America, causing riots among Bobby Soxers and selling millions of records. By the 1950s, after a career resurrection that included his Oscar-winning role in From Here to Eternity, he was Hollywood royalty. But success made Frank paranoid. He had grown up poor, watching his father struggle, watching his mother Dolly manipulate and control everyone around her. He learned early that people wanted things from you, your money, your connections, your name. And once they got what they needed, they disappeared or turned on you. This fear shaped every relationship Frank had. He surrounded himself with loyalists, the Rat Pack being the most famous example, and he demanded absolute loyalty in return. Betray Frank Sinatra, and you were erased from his life, completely and permanently. "My father operated on a simple principle," Tina Sinatra wrote. "You were either in or you were out. There was no middle ground. And if you crossed him, if you betrayed his trust, you ceased to exist to him. He would literally never speak your name again." But 3 betrayals cut so deep that Frank couldn't simply erase them from his life. These 3 haunted him, ate at him, became the lens through which he viewed every subsequent relationship. And late in life, he wrote them down, not for revenge, but for understanding, trying to make sense of how people he had loved so completely could have hurt him so profoundly. Stop here. What comes next changes everything. The Golden Years and the Gathering Storm. 1953 to 1966. After his career comeback in the early 1950s, Frank Sinatra entered what should have been the happiest period of his life. He was married to Ava Gardner, the love of his life, and the woman who drove him to the edge of madness with her independence and refusal to be controlled. He had formed the Rat Pack with Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, a brotherhood of performers who revolutionized Las Vegas entertainment. He had started his own record label, Reprise, giving him creative and financial control he'd never had before. He was making classic albums, starring in hit films, and wielding enormous cultural and political influence. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. His marriage to Ava ended in 1957. devastating him in ways he never fully recovered from. His relationships with the Rat Pack members, while publicly jovial, were increasingly strained by Frank's need for control and their growing resentment of his domination. And his business ventures, while successful, were making him dependent on managers and advisors whose loyalty he constantly questioned. "The thing about being Frank Sinatra," Dean Martin once said, "is that everyone wants a piece of you. Everyone's got an angle." And Frank knew it, suspected it, in everyone around him. It made him mean sometimes, suspicious, always. He tested people constantly to see if they'd betray him, and sometimes, in testing them, he pushed them away himself. It was during this period that the three great betrayals occurred, not all at once, but in a cascade that left Frank emotionally devastated and convinced that trust was a weakness he could no longer afford. But the most shocking moment was still ahead. The notebook revealed, 1968 to 1998. According to Tina Sinatra's account, Frank started keeping the notebook in 1968, shortly after the third betrayal occurred. It was a simple leather-bound journal, small enough to fit in a jacket pocket, that he kept locked in his desk. Only Barbara Sinatra, his fourth wife whom he married in 1976, knew of its existence, and even she was never allowed to read it. The notebook contained 3 sections, one for each betrayal, where Frank had written his account of what happened, how it made him feel, and why he could never forgive. The notebook came to light on May 14, 1998, Frank's final day. According to Tina, her father had rallied briefly in the evening, his mind clearing after days of confusion. He asked Tina to get the notebook from his desk, and when she brought it to him, he opened it to the page with the 3 names. His hands were shaking, but his voice was firm. "These 3. Remember these 3. They taught me that love and loyalty mean nothing when ambition and selfishness get involved. I want you to know their names, so you don't make my mistakes." Tina hesitated to include the contents in her memoir, but she ultimately decided her father wanted the truth known, not for revenge, but as a warning. These were the 3 names in Frank Sinatra's notebook, and the betrayals that broke the chairman of the board. Name 1, Peter Lawford, the brother who chose politics over friendship. The first name in Frank's notebook was Peter Lawford, the British actor who had been a core member of the Rat Pack and one of Frank's closest friends throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. But their friendship ended abruptly in 1963, and Frank never spoke to Peter again for the remaining 35 years of his life. The betrayal stemmed from Peter's marriage to Patricia Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy's sister. Frank had cultivated a close relationship with JFK, performing at his inauguration, hosting him at his Palm Springs compound, and serving as a bridge between Hollywood and the Kennedy administration. Frank even renovated his Palm Springs home specifically to accommodate a presidential visit, building a helipad and adding security features. But in March 1962, JFK canceled a planned weekend stay at Frank's home, instead staying at Bing Crosby's estate. The reason, Frank later learned through Peter, was that Attorney General Robert Kennedy had concerns about Frank's alleged connections to organized crime figures like Sam Giancana. RFK had advised his brother that staying at Sinatra's home would be politically problematic. What devastated Frank wasn't the cancellation itself, it was Peter's role in it. According to Frank's notebook entry, Peter had not only failed to defend Frank to the Kennedys, but had actively participated in the decision, agreeing that Frank's associations made him a political liability. Peter then delivered the news to Frank in person, and according to witnesses, seemed almost relieved to be distancing himself from Frank to protect his own position within the Kennedy family. "I built that helipad for him," Frank wrote in his notebook. "I renovated my home. I put my reputation on the line supporting his campaign. And Peter, who I treated like a brother, who I gave work to when he was nobody, chose his in-laws over me. He didn't even fight for me. He agreed I was a liability." The wound went deeper because Frank had genuinely loved the Kennedys' Camelot mystique and saw his relationship with JFK as validation that the kid from Hoboken had made it to the absolute top of American society. Having that snatched away, with Peter as the messenger who seemed almost pleased about it, felt like the ultimate betrayal of both friendship and loyalty. Frank immediately cut Peter out of his life. He banned him from Rat Pack performances, removed him from film projects, and literally erased him, having Peter edited out of photographs and promotional materials. When Peter later fell on hard times financially and reached out to Frank for help, Frank didn't respond. When Peter died in 1984, Frank didn't attend the funeral. He chose them over me, Frank's notebook entry concluded. After everything I did for him, I can forgive many things, but I can't forgive being thrown away like garbage when I became inconvenient. Name 2. Mia Farrow, the wife who betrayed their private understanding. The second name in Frank's notebook was perhaps the most personally painful, Mia Farrow, his third wife, whom he married in 1966 when he was 50 and she was 21. Their marriage lasted less than 2 years, but the betrayal Frank felt extended far beyond the divorce. Frank had been explicit with Mia from the beginning. He expected his wife to prioritize their marriage over her career. This wasn't unusual for Frank's generation and mindset. He had expected the same from Ava Gardner, which contributed to that marriage's failure. But with Mia, Frank believed they had an understanding. He would support her career, but when he needed her, when he asked her to be present, she would prioritize him. The breaking point came in 1968, during the filming of Rosemary's Baby. Frank was shooting The Detective and wanted Mia to finish her film quickly so she could join him. When director Roman Polanski insisted on additional shooting days, and Mia chose to stay with the production rather than leave to be with Frank, Frank felt betrayed at a fundamental level. "We had an agreement," Frank wrote in his notebook. "She understood what being Mrs. Sinatra meant. And when it came down to choosing between some horror movie and her husband, she chose the movie. She made me feel like I was nothing. Like my needs, my feelings, didn't matter as much as her career." What made this betrayal particularly painful for Frank was the public humiliation. He had his lawyer serve Mia divorce papers on the set of Rosemary's Baby, a move widely criticized as cruel. But from Frank's perspective, documented in his notebook, the cruelty was Mia's, publicly choosing her work over him, making him look weak and unimportant. The deeper wound was that Mia represented Frank's last real attempt at romantic vulnerability after Ava Gardner. He had allowed himself to love again, to believe that someone young and beautiful could genuinely care for him beyond his fame and power. Mia's choice to prioritize her film over their marriage confirmed Frank's darkest fear, that people ultimately chose their own interests over loyalty to him. "I wanted to believe she was different," his notebook entry continued. "That she saw me, Frank, not just the chairman of the board, but in the end, she was like all the others. Her career mattered more than I did. I was just another stepping stone, another name to build her career on." Frank and Mia remained friendly in later years, but his notebook reveals that he never truly forgave her. The betrayal was too personal, too close to his deepest insecurities about being loved for himself rather than his position and power. And this is the part the studios never wanted revealed. Name 3. Mickey Rudin, the lawyer who stole his trust and his money. The third name in Frank's notebook, and perhaps the most devastating betrayal of all, was Mickey Rudin, Frank's attorney and business manager from 1950 until 1984. Rudin was more than Frank's lawyer. He was his confidant, his fixer, the man who structured Frank's business empire and managed his personal affairs. Frank trusted Rudin completely, giving him power of attorney and carte blanche to make financial decisions on his behalf. The betrayal was discovered in 1984 when Frank's children, particularly Tina, began questioning certain financial arrangements. What they uncovered was a systematic pattern of self-dealing, where Rudin had been directing Frank's money into investments and ventures, where Rudin himself had hidden financial interests. While not technically illegal, Rudin could argue he was acting within the scope of his authority. It was a massive breach of fiduciary duty and personal trust, According to estate documents later filed in court, Rudin had structured deals where Frank's companies would contract with other companies in which Rudin was a silent partner, essentially allowing Rudin to profit from both sides of transactions. He had negotiated contracts that gave him percentages above and beyond his attorney fees. He had made investment decisions that benefited his other clients and his own portfolio, sometimes at Frank's expense. Mickey had his hand in everything, Frank wrote in his notebook. Every deal, every contract, every investment. I trusted him with my life, with my children's future, and he used that trust to steal from me, not with a gun or a mask, but with a pen and contracts I didn't fully understand. He robbed me while shaking my hand. What made Rudin's betrayal uniquely painful was its duration and intimacy. This wasn't a single act of betrayal, but a 30-year pattern of exploitation hidden behind the facade of friendship and professional service. Rudin knew Frank's fears, his weaknesses, his blind spots, and he used that knowledge to construct a system where he could enrich himself while maintaining Frank's absolute trust. Frank fired Rudin in 1984, but the damage was done. Estate accountants estimated that Rudin's self-dealing cost Frank somewhere between $5 million and $15 million over the course of their relationship, money that should have gone to Frank's children and grandchildren. I made him rich, Frank's notebook entry concluded. I made him powerful. I gave him access to my entire life. And he betrayed me in the worst possible way, slowly, deliberately, while looking me in the eye and calling me friend. Peter betrayed me for politics. Mia betrayed me for her career. But Mickey betrayed me for money day after day, year after year. That's the one I can never forgive. The weight of betrayal. What Frank Sinatra's notebook reveals is not a vindictive man keeping score, but a deeply wounded person trying to understand how those he loved most completely betrayed him. Each betrayal represented a different form of abandonment. Peter choosing political expediency over loyalty, Mia choosing career over marriage, Mickey choosing enrichment over honor. These betrayals shaped the last 30 years of Frank's life. He became more controlling, more suspicious, more likely to cut people off preemptively before they could hurt him. His relationship with his children suffered because he struggled to trust even them completely. His friendships became more transactional, more about what people could do for him rather than genuine emotional connection. After Mickey, Dad didn't really trust anyone the same way, Tina Sinatra wrote. He was always looking for the angle, always suspicious of people's motives. It made him lonely, I think. He surrounded himself with people, but kept them at arm's length. The only person he truly trusted in his later years was Barbara, and even then, I think part of him was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The notebook was Frank's attempt to process these wounds, to create a record that explained his behavior to those who might wonder why the chairman of the board seemed so cold, so unforgiving, so unwilling to let anyone truly close. It was his way of saying, I wasn't born this way. I was made this way by people I loved who taught me that trust is a weapon people use against you. The story of Frank Sinatra's notebook is the story of how betrayal changes us. Not the small betrayals of everyday life, but the deep, fundamental betrayals by people we've given power over our hearts, our finances, our lives. It's about how even the most powerful people in the world can be destroyed, not by enemies, but by the people they let inside their defenses. Frank Sinatra died on May 14, 1998, surrounded by love from Barbara and his children. But his notebook reveals that he died carrying wounds that never healed. Betrayals he analyzed but couldn't overcome. Names he couldn't forgive no matter how many years passed. On his final day, after showing Tina the 3 names, Frank closed the notebook and handed it to her. Keep this, he whispered. Remember that loyalty is the only thing that really matters. Everything else, money, fame, success, it all means nothing if you can't trust the people closest to you. These 3 taught me that lesson. Make sure my grandchildren learn it without having to live through what I did. As Tina held her father's hand in his final hours, she understood that the notebook wasn't about hatred or revenge. It was about a man who had spent his life building an empire but couldn't protect himself from the people he loved most. It was about how the chairman of the board, the voice, old Blue Eyes, the man who seemed invincible, was broken not by age or illness, but by 3 betrayals he carried to his grave. Today, we remember Frank Sinatra for My Way, for the Rat Pack, for the swagger and the style. But his notebook reminds us that behind the legend was a man who learned the hardest way that even perfect loyalty can't guarantee loyalty in return, that even the most powerful person can be wounded by those they trust, and that some betrayals cut so deep that all the fame and success in the world can't heal them.